So in our previous lecture, we were talking about Aurangzeb's Deccani policy. We had already discussed its interpretation by the two groups of historians. Now we need to take down the notes, right? So just to recap, traditional historiography by historians such as Sir Jadunath Sarkar, etc., first of all considers Aurangzeb's aggression in the Deccan to be a matter of choice and highlights its destructive nature to the long-term health of the Mughal Empire. On the other hand, Marxist historians have pointed out that it was not a matter of choice, rather it was a matter of compulsion for Aurangzeb to invade Bijapur and Golconda and annex them, but they do accept that certain mistakes were made by Aurangzeb. At the same time, they highlight that it was not only the mistakes of Aurangzeb but other Mughal emperors also. Further, Aurangzeb's aggression in the Deccan has also been contextualized in contrast to the other emerging problems within the Mughal Empire, and thus it has been partially justified by the Marxist historians. At the same time, they agree that the Deccan policy of Aurangzeb was harmful for the long-term health of the Mughal Empire. तो ये हो गया एक क्विक रिकैप उसका. अब इसको वेरी सिंपल टर्म्स में लिख लेते हैं. राइट डाउन. Traditionally, the Deccan policy of Aurangzeb evaluated by scholars such as Sir Jadunath Sarkar emphasizes that military aggression in the Deccan was simply a matter of choice for him. Military aggression in the Deccan was simply a matter of choice for him. Full stop. Sub point. Jadunath Sarkar argued that Aurangzeb's Deccan aggression and territorial conquest made his empire too large and cumbersome to manage. Made his empire too large and cumbersome to manage. Full stop. Thus, it collapsed under its own weight. it collapsed under its own weight. Next point, he compared Aurangzeb to a python, that had swallowed more than it could digest. That had swallowed to a python that had swallowed more than it could digest. Full stop. Next point. He coined the term. Deccani ulcer. And compared it to the Spanish ulcer that had destroyed the Napoleonic Empire. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. However, upon closer observation, we find that territorial expansion was not simply a matter of choice. Full stop. Rather, it was a compulsion, not only for Aurangzeb, but even other emperors. Subpoint. Mughal expansion in the Deccan started under Akbar because he wanted complete control over the trade of Gujarat and Malwa. Next point. Similarly, when Shah Jahan violated his own peace treaty with Bijapur and Golconda in 1656, he was trying to secure trade routes to the deep south. Next point. In fact, by the second half of the 17th century, the trade of the Coromandel alone was four times the volume of the Gujarat trade. 4 times the volume of the Gujarat trade. Full stop. Next main point. Thus, Aurangzeb's Deccan policy was not simply an expression of imperial ambition, was not simply an expression of imperial ambition. Full stop. Rather, it was a mixture between imperialism and material compulsions. Imperialism and material compulsions. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. At the same time, it must be conceded that there were some fatal flaws in Aurangzeb's Deccan policy. Subpoint number 1. He could not perceive the true character of the Maratha resistance, and his brutal execution of Shahuji provoked a massive popular revolt. Perhaps a better strategy may have been to use local powers such as Bijapur and Golconda as a buffer between the Mughals and Marathas. ठीक है? Next subpoint number 2. Similarly, Aurangzeb's decision to demarcate the entire territory of Bijapur and Golconda as Khalisa land caused a sudden and catastrophic shortage of Jagirs. Within brackets, Jagirdari crisis. Close brackets, which accelerated the process of Mughal decline. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो। एट द सेम टाइम comma the blame for the Deccan crisis, should not be put on the shoulders of Aurangzeb alone. Full stop. Sub point number 1. The military suppression of political rebellions was a long established Mughal practice. Full stop. Aurangzeb was thus not acting unpredictably. So he was doing what was expected of him. That is the idea. Next sub point. Secondly, the process of territorial expansion in the Deccan had been going on since the end of the 16th century. Full stop. Aurangzeb was simply taking it to its logical conclusion. Simply taking it to its logical conclusion. Next sub point. Lastly, the incorporation of the local nobility into the Mughal Mansabdari was an established instrument of integration. Full stop. Thus, by integrating the Bijapuri and Golkondi nobles into the Mansabdari system, Aurangzeb was acting in the best interests of the state. Full stop. At the same time, the mounting military and administrative expenses of the empire forced him to seek greater revenue income by categorizing the entire area of conquest, as Khalisa land, ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. इन अदर वर्ड्स while Aurangzeb may not be completely absolved, absolved of his responsibility for the Deccan crisis, comma, his policy must be evaluated in a more comprehensive and objective manner. ठीक है. Now, इसी में एक सब हेडिंग लिख लो, critical evaluation of Aurangzeb's Deccan policy. हमें क्या क्या देखना होगा यहाँ पे? नेगेटिव्स एंड पॉजिटिव्स. तो नेगेटिव्स में बताओ क्या था? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, Aurangzeb remained involved in Deccani affairs for the later half of his reign for almost 25 years, thus neglecting the administrative and military affairs of northern India. ठीक है. And this led to an administrative and military breakdown. लिख लो. Negatives में write down number 1. Aurangzeb remained completely involved in Deccani affairs for almost 25 years. Thus ignoring other regions, comma, leading to a breakdown of Mughal administration and military power in those regions. ठीक है. नंबर 2, और क्या शॉर्टकमिंग था? The Deccani military campaign proved to be extremely expensive to unsustainable levels. Aurangzeb continued to fight against the Marathas for almost 25 years without much success. Yes, he was able to capture and execute Shahuji. Yes, he was able to capture Shambhaji ji, the next Chhatrapati, but he was not able to suppress the पॉपुलर रिवोल्ट एट द ग्राउंड लेवल एट ऑल, राइट। एंड इसकी वजह से हुआ क्या, इट नॉट ओनली strained the state finances, it also sapped the Mughal military strength. But even more importantly, it shattered the myth of Mughal invincibility. अभी तक जहां पे भी मुगल आर्मी जाती थी, it always returned victorious. But now this myth was shattered and other Mughal detractors, other Mughal opponents were emboldened by this. ठीक है, this was a major loss of prestige, but also the aura of invincibility, which was a major factor in others being afraid of Mughal authority, being respectful of Mughal authority, etc. So now they are going to start violating it, and the Mughals are going to feel helpless in opposing those elements. ठीक है, write down number 2. The lengthy and expensive Deccan campaign not only strained the Mughal economy or the state finances, not only strained the state finances, it also sapped the military strength of the empire, sapped the military strength of the empire. But the most disastrous, full stop, but the most disastrous was the loss of Mughal prestige as the Maratha revolt shattered the myth of their invincibility. The myth of their invincibility. ठीक है, number 3. Now, since Aurangzeb had annexed both Bijapur and Golconda, what was he forced to do? He was forced to give high Mansab rank to the local nobles. And what was the result of this? The size of the Mughal Mansabdari increased by a great number. However, there was not sufficient increase of availability of Jagirs. And this is going to lead to the intensification of the Mansabdari Jagirdari crisis. Write down. As Aurangzeb annexed Bijapur and Golconda, he was forced to give high mansabs to the local nobles. Full stop. However, the corresponding growth of territory was not sufficient to sustain the increased demand for jagirs. With this, the shortage of jagirs reached crisis levels. Reached crisis levels. Full stop. This problem was further compounded by the fact that much of the newly acquired land, बीजापुर और गोलकोंडा का लैंड क्या गैंजेटिक वैली जितना या फिर इंडस वैली जितना प्रोडक्टिव फर्टाइल होगा? Much of the newly acquired land was infertile. Was infertile. ठीक है? So जो मुगल विक्ट्री था in the Deccan conquest of Bijapur and Golconda, was it a real victory or empty victory? Empty victory था. जीत तो गए लेकिन वो खोखली जीत थी. That is the idea. Next main point लिखो. Thus, the early Mughal victory or the initial Mughal victory in the Deccan was a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory. तो ऐसी जीत जिसमें हार छुपी होती है. ठीक है? तो ये हो गए negatives of Aurangzeb's Deccan policy. But there were certain positives also. So write down positives. लिखो. The Deccan campaign of Aurangzeb did not produce all round failures. Full stop. It also yielded some positive results. It also yielded some positive results. किस तरह के positive results? First of all, the Mughal administration, including the Zabti system, was also applied to the Deccan for the first time, thus bringing about administrative uniformity and greater efficiency, better governance. So the people of the Deccan also benefited from these things. Write down. Number one, with the annexation of the Deccan, comma, the Mughals introduced their administrative machinery, including the Zabti system, which was qualitatively superior machinery, including the Zabti system, which was qualitatively superior to local or to native administration, which was qualitatively superior to native administration. Full stop. Thus, the Deccani people benefited from better governance. Better governance. Full stop. Additionally, political and administrative unification took place throughout the Indian subcontinent. Throughout the Indian subcontinent with the Mughal conquest. With the Mughal conquest. ठीक है, तो एक तो ये पॉजिटिव निकला. सेकंड पॉजिटिव, और बताओ क्या होगा. Before this, in the Deccan, in different regions, different kinds of coins were being used. Ab the silver rupee became the standardized currency throughout India, thus bringing about monetary and thus economic unification at a much deeper level. Write down. The introduction of the silver rupee brought about the monetary unification of northern and southern India. Northern and southern India, thus leading to deeper economic integration. Deeper economic integration. Deeper economic integration. ठीक है? And when was this taking place? At a time when the economic center of gravity was shifting from northern India towards southern India because of the emergence of direct trade between southern India and Europe. ठीक है, तो इसकी वजह से हुआ क्या. The economy of not only southern India but the whole of India was integrated into the global economy. Global commerce में पूरे के पूरे सब कॉन्टिनेंट को कनेक्ट से कनेक्ट कर दिया इसने. ठीक है, राइट डाउन. इसी में ही दिस प्रोसेस कोइंसाइडेड with deepening trade between South India and Europe. Between South India and Europe. This process coincided with deepening trade between South India and Europe. Full stop. Thus, it connected the whole of India's economy to the global economy at a much deeper level. At a much deeper level. ठीक है? And what is this going to lead to? It is going to lead to the growing commercialization of production as well as agriculture in India in a manner that it would be beneficial for Indians. क्योंकि इस समय तो Indians का ही रूल है यहाँ पर, right? सरकार अपनी है, तो वन वे फ्री ट्रेड नहीं होगा, एक्चुअल फ्री ट्रेड होगा, in which both Indians and Europeans are going to benefit. And since Europe was dependent upon Indian manufactured goods, especially silken and cotton textiles, therefore this translated to greater all around prosperity for Indians, not only urban prosperity but also rural prosperity, क्योंकि farmers पार्ट टाइम एक्टिविटी की तरह कॉटन टेक्सटाइल मैन्युफैक्चर करते थे, हैंडीक्राफ्ट की तरह उसको बनाते थे, राइट? राइट डाउन दिस ट्रांसलेटेड, हाँ सेम पॉइंट में, दिस ट्रांसलेटेड टू द कमर्शियलाइजेशन ऑफ प्रोडक्शन एंड एग्रीकल्चर, leading to production and agriculture, leading to greater all around prosperity. ठीक है? नंबर 3, और क्या मुनाफा होगा इसका, क्या बेनिफिट होगा डेक्कन पॉलिसी का? After the death of Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire began to crumble. But in its wake, in the Deccan region, several regional powers emerged, which continued to provide effective governance to the local people for the next century, throughout the 18th century. Okay? So the emergence of regional kingdoms, this is another advantage. Write down. With the decline of the Mughal Empire, after the death of Aurangzeb, several regional powers emerged in the south and provided effective governance throughout the 18th century. Full stop. These include throughout the 18th century. Full stop. These include kingdoms such as the Marathas, Mysore, Hyderabad, and Travancore. ठीक है? तो ऑल अराउंड क्राइसिस नहीं था, कई सारे पॉजिटिव्स भी इमर्ज हुए इसकी वजह से. आई होप दिस इज क्लियर. तो ये हो गया औरंगजेब का डेक्कन पॉलिसी. एंड लास्ट एस्पेक्ट ऑफ औरंगजेब्स रेन, revolts during Aurangzeb's reign. ठीक है? Now Aurangzeb's reign witnessed a series of revolts by several groups in different regions. The combined effect of which was the decline of the Mughal Empire. These include revolts such as the Jat Revolt, Satnami Revolt, Sikh Revolt, Maratha Revolt, Rajput Revolt, and revolt by Afghans. ठीक है. Now controversy कहाँ पे आता है? With regards to the interpretation of the nature of these revolts. Traditional historians ने क्या बोला? जदुनाथ सरकार, आशीर्वादी लाल श्रीवास्तव, etc. that the majority of these revolts were brought about by non-Muslim groups within the Mughal Empire. तो इन्होंने इसका एक communal interpretation दिया है that because of the religious orthodoxy of the Mughal Empire under Aurangzeb, because of his reversal of the religious liberalism of Akbar and Jahangir, there was growing discontent among the non-Muslim sections of the population. Imperial persecution and interference into the internal religious and cultural practices of these groups was fueling this resistance, and these revolts were simple expressions of their religious discontent. ठीक है, तो ट्रेडिशनल हिस्टोरियंस ने इनको कैरेक्टराइज किया है एज religious revolts primarily. On the other hand, Marxist historians क्या बोलेंगे? That religion was only the superficial characteristic of these revolts. Yes, the banner of revolt was definitely raised in the name of religion, but the basic energy needed for the revolt was due to a combination of political or economic factors. So these were politico-religious revolts at the best. They were not simple religious revolts. For example, Jat, Satnami, Sikh, and Maratha revolt were all the products of agrarian discontent. In the case of the Sikh and Maratha revolts, they were also expressions of regional independence from an increasingly oppressive imperial power. The Rajput revolt was a result of the loss of autonomy, or at least the perceived loss of autonomy, when Aurangzeb decided to intervene in the issue of succession at Jodhpur, and the demand of jizya, which was also seen as an invasion of Rajput autonomy of their internal matters. Right? Whereas Afghan revolts were an expression of the long-standing hostility between the Afghans and the Mughals, and it was also an expression of Afghan tribal independence. The Afghan theory of state was diametrically opposed with the Mughal theory of kingship. Afghans believed that the Sultan was the first among equals, whereas the Mughals were imposing the idea that the king is a god among men, that his word is law. तो it was not acceptable to the Afghans and पुश्तों से इनकी दुश्मनी चल रही थी, तो वही अब इसका एक्सप्रेशन। क्लियर है? So that is how the different groups of historians have analyzed it. Right? Conclusion में क्या बोल सकते हैं हम? That yes, while religion may have played a part in instigating these rebellions due to the religious orthodoxy of Aurangzeb, but other factors were more important. Clear? Take down a question. Analyze the character of the revolts against the Mughals during the reign of Aurangzeb. आंसर लिखो। From the 1670s onwards, from the 1670s onwards, comma, the Mughal Empire witnessed a series of localized uprisings brought about by several groups in different regions of the empire. Brought about by several groups in different regions of the empire. Full stop. While these uprisings were largely contained and the integrity of the Mughal Empire was preserved, comma, they irreparably damaged Mughal strength. They irreparably damaged Mughal strength, leading to its ultimate decline. Leading to its ultimate decline. Full stop. Next paragraph लिखो. Some of the important uprisings are as follows. Some of the important uprisings are as follows. Number 1, Jat Revolt. Around the region of Mathura, Agra and Bharatpur. Mathura, Agra and Bharatpur. From 1669 onwards, from 1669 onwards, under Gokul Jat and Raja Ram Jat. Number 2, Satnami Revolt. In the region of Awadh from 1672 onwards, by a community of low caste farmers who were followers of Saint Kabir. Number 3, Sikh Revolt. In the region of Punjab from 1675 onwards, from 1675 onwards, by Guru Gobind Singh and his followers. Guru Gobind Singh and his followers, after the execution of the ninth Sikh Guru. कौन? Guru Tegh Bahadur. Of the ninth Sikh Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur. So कश्मीर में जो लोकल मुगल गवर्नर था, he was persecuting Hindus. So a contingent of about 500 Kashmiri Pandits approached Guru Tegh Bahadur at Amritsar to shield them and protect them. He accepted. This was seen as an act of rebellion by Aurangzeb, that the Guru is directly challenging Mughal political authority. So the Guru was first arrested, brought to Delhi, and along with his followers, he was ब्रूटली एग्जीक्यूटेड, राइट। तो आपने ये शीशगंज गुरुद्वारा देखा होगा चांदनी चौक में, वहां पे एग्जीक्यूशन हुआ था। दैट इज वेयर देयर हेड्स वर डिस्प्लेड फॉर अ वेरी लॉन्ग टाइम, एंड दैट इज वाई वहां पे गुरुद्वारा भी बना दिया गया है। नाउ गुरु गोबिंद सिंह बिकेम अ मार्टर इन द आईज ऑफ द सिख्स, और टॉर्चरर, एग्जीक्यूशनर, ऑपरेसर, ऑपरेसर कौन बने? द मुगल एम्परर्स, राइट, द मुगल एम्पायर। तो दिस लेड टू अ मेजर रिबेलियन, एंड लीडर कौन इमर्ज हुए? द 10th सिख गुरु, दैट इज गुरु गोबिंद सिंह। ठीक है, तो ये हो गया सिख रिबेलियन फ्रॉम 1675 ऑनवर्ड्स। नेक्स्ट राइट, मराठा रिबेलियन। मराठा रिबेलियन फ्रॉम द लेट 1660s बाय शिवाजी महाराज, बाय छत्रपति शिवाजी, who declared independence in 1674, leading to a lengthy conflict. 74, leading to a lengthy conflict. ठीक है, नंबर 5, राजपूत रिवोल्ट from 1679 onwards, led by the Rathors of Marwar under Durga Das, later joined by Rana Raj Singh of Mewar. Rana Raj Singh, राणा, मेवाड़ के जो राजा होते थे उनको राणा बोलते थे ना, राणा राज सिंह ऑफ मेवाड़। तो ये तो हम ऑलरेडी डिस्कस कर चुके हैं कि क्यों दोनों ने ज्वाइन किया था। एंड फाइनली अफगान रिवोल्ट, नंबर 6, अफगान रिवोल्ट from 1672 onwards, 1672 onwards, in places such as Rohilkhand and Farrukhabad, by different tribes of Afghans, by different tribes of Afghans. ठीक है? So these are the major examples of rebellions, localized rebellions against the Mughals under Aurangzeb's reign. Now next paragraph लिखो. The nature of these revolts, the nature of these revolts has drawn much controversy, has drawn much controversy. Full stop. Earlier historians such as Jadunath Sarkar and A.L. Shrivastava J.N. Sarkar and A.L. Shrivastava opine that the majority of these uprisings were religious revolts, Full stop. Subpoint, provoked by the religious bigotry and persecution of Aurangzeb's administration. Groups such as the Jats, Satnamis, Sikhs, Marathas, and Rajputs had no option but to rebel in order to protect their religion and way of life. Protect their religion and way of life. ठीक है? Is this clear? Next main point लिखो, next paragraph. On the other hand, Marxist historians have re-evaluated these revolts in light of material factors. Full stop. Subpoint. According to them, many of these revolts were the result of agrarian discontent due to the rising burden of taxation, the rising burden of taxation, and the oppression of Mughal Jagirdars, of Mughal Jagirdars. These include ये पहले चार जाट, सतनामी, सिख एंड मराठा रिवोल्ट्स. जाट, सतनामी, सिख एंड मराठा रिवोल्ट्स. ठीक है. Full stop. At the same time, these revolts were definitely raised under the banner of religion. Under the banner of religion. Thus, they have been interpreted as politico-religious uprisings. Interpreted as politico-religious uprisings. Next point. Next point. Additionally, in the context of the Sikh and Maratha uprisings, they have also been linked to the process of state formation and the assertion of regional independence. From a foreign exploitative power. From a foreign exploitative power. So it was a bid for regional independence. ये एक उसका अलग इंटरप्रिटेशन है. फॉरेन एंड एक्सप्लॉयटेटिव पावर. तो मुगल्स को मराठास और सिख्स एक फॉरेन एक्सप्लॉयटेटिव पावर की तरह से देखने लग गए थे बाय दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम, एंड दे वर ट्राइंग टू असर्ट रीजनल इंडिपेंडेंस. क्यों? क्योंकि अब यहाँ पे खुद के नए स्टेट्स जर्मिनेट हो रहे थे, फॉर्म हो रहे थे. मराठा एम्पायर बाय छत्रपति शिवाजी एंड सिख एम्पायर जिसका फॉर्मेशन शुरू हुआ कब? विद द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ द खालसा. ठीक है. तो एक पॉलिटिकल मिलिट्री एंटिटी की तरह से खालसा इमर्ज होगा, एंड दैट इज गोइंग टू डायरेक्टली क्लैश विद मुगल इंपीरियल पावर. क्लियर? नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. In the case of the Rajput rebellion, the main issue was the loss of autonomy. And the perceived loss of autonomy and the perceived breaking off a long-standing compact between the Mughals and the Rajputs. So this was not a bid for independence. Rather, it was a bid by Jodhpur and Chittorgarh to restore the status quo that already existed. Okay? So in their eyes, that status quo had been disrupted by Aurangzeb. They were simply trying to restore it. Thus, full stop. Thus, the Rajput rebellion was a bid to restore the status quo. Restore the status quo. ठीक है? Next point लिखो. Finally, the Afghan rebellion was the product of the generational hostility between the Rajputs and Afghans and an expression of Afghan tribal independence. Mughals and Afghans and an expression of Afghan tribal independence. Which was ideologically opposed to the Mughal institution of divine kingship and centralized control. Mughal institution of divine kingship and centralized control. ठीक है? Conclusion लिख लो. In light of these arguments, it becomes clear that these localized revolts were not simply the product of religious persecution, rather a combination of multiple factors and forces were at play. Full stop. They were the symptoms. These revolts, they were the symptoms of historical transformation. Being brought about by the decline of Mughal authority. And the rise of regional power centers. तो idea ये है that a new order was emerging within the power structure of India. जो traditional established power था Mughals, वो decline हो रहे थे और अब अलग अलग regions में कई सारे नई powers emerge हो रहे थे who were bidding for either regional independence or supremacy against the Mughal empire. और जो change in political order होगा वो किस तरह का होगा, violent होगा या peaceful होगा? Violent होगा, and these revolts were the symptoms of this historical transformation. ठीक है? So that is the note on which we can conclude our answer. Is this clear? समझ में आया है? तो ये हो गए these revolts. Now next certain questions के through हम discuss करेंगे some aspects of Mughal India, namely the potentiality of European style industrialization emerging in Mughal India. तो urban economy इसके through discuss करेंगे. We are also going to talk about urbanization in India, उसका क्या characteristic था. We are also going to talk about women in the agrarian society, and finally the idea of whether the Mughal Empire was a highly centralized one or not. तो ये चार चीजें हमको डिस्कस करनी है. Following that, अगर आज टाइम मिलता है तो we are going to discuss the decline of the Mughal Empire. तो पहला क्वेश्चन है, discuss the potentiality of European style capitalism emerging in Mughal India. ठीक है, तो यूरोपियन स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म का मतलब क्या होता है? इंडस्ट्रियल कैपिटलिज्म. कब इमर्ज हुआ सबसे पहले? इन दी लेट 18th century, from the 1760s onwards. With what? With the beginning of the industrial revolution. तो क्वेश्चन सिंपली ये पूछ रहा है कि was it possible for the industrial revolution to have started in India or not? क्या मुगल इकोनॉमी में वो पोटेंशियल था कि इंडिया में इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन शुरू हो जाए, या फिर ऐसा कोई पोटेंशियल नहीं था? दैट इज व्हाट इज बीइंग आस्क्ड. ठीक है, नाउ let us consider the answer. Now in Europe, the emergence of industrial capitalism from the 1760s onwards was presaged by mercantile capitalism from the 14th century onwards. तो यूरोप में इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन शुरू हुआ 1760s में, लेकिन हमें ये जानना जरूरी है कि इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन शुरू होने के जस्ट पहले यूरोप में क्या चल रहा था. तो फ्रॉम 14th century onwards, Europe had been undergoing or experiencing मर्चेंट कैपिटलिज्म और मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म. ठीक है, तो हम क्या आर्ग्यू करना चाह रहे हैं, ये देखना है हमें कि इंडिया में मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म था मुगल एम्पायर में या नहीं था, और अगर था, यूरोपियन स्टाइल मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म इंडिया में भी था, तो जैसे यूरोप में इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन शुरू हुआ वैसे ही इंडिया में भी शुरू हो सकता था. दैट इज व्हाट वी आर गोइंग टू इन्वेस्टिगेट. Now to investigate if such a development was possible in Mughal India, an objective analysis of the Mughal economy is necessary. क्लियर है यहां तक? हमको क्या बताना है कि इंडिया में इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन हो सकता था या नहीं हो सकता था. उसके लिए हम क्या देखेंगे, क्या एनालाइज करेंगे कि जैसे यूरोप में मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म चल रहा था बिटवीन द 14th एंड 17th सेंचुरी, क्या मुगल इंडिया में भी उसी तरह का मर्केंटाइल कैपिटलिज्म चल रहा था, और अगर चल रहा था तो उसमें क्या प्रॉब्लम्स थी, और वो प्रॉब्लम्स सरमाउंटेबल थी या फिर इनसरमाउंटेबल थी. तो फॉर दैट एन ऑब्जेक्टिव एनालिसिस ऑफ द मुगल इकोनॉमी इज necessary. ठीक है, now we have to address this in two parts. एक तो देखेंगे पॉजिटिव पोटेंशियल्स क्या क्या थे, और सेकंड हम देखेंगे कि लिमिटेशंस क्या थे मुगल इकोनॉमी के, which may have prevented industrialization from taking place. तो one of the preconditions for industrialization to take place is the availability of capital. लोगों के पास इतना accumulated wealth होना चाहिए so that they are able to invest it to set up factories, to organize labor, to pay them wages, to purchase machinery and raw material. तो सारे factors of industrialization, production जो भी हैं, उनको organize करने के लिए basic necessity क्या होती है? पैसा, capital, investable wealth, and the presence of an investor class, those who have the ability as well as willingness to take the risk. उसको क्या बोलते हैं? Entrepreneur. तो एंटरप्राइज के लिए कैपिटल चाहिए और एंटरप्रेन्योर चाहिए. वी नीड टू सी कि इंडिया में क्या मुगल पीरियड में ऐसा सिचुएशन था या फिर नहीं था. नाउ वी नो दैट capital was definitely available. Contemporary records as well as travelogues mention a class of extremely wealthy Indian merchants, with people such as Mullus Abdul Ghaffar and Virji Bora. These were two of the most famous merchants of India during the Mughal Empire. दोनों गुजरात से थे. Mullus Abdul Ghaffar was involved in trade with territories lying towards the west. तो ईरान के थ्रू अरेबियन पेनिनसुला तक इनका ट्रेड एम्पायर फैला हुआ था. Virji Vora, on the other hand, was a merchant who was trading primarily with Southeast Asia and China. So he had a large fleet of ships, almost 500 इनके खुद के personal ships थे, company चलाते थे ये, ठीक है? And he also had accumulated immense amounts of wealth. They put their wealth towards production as well as trade. So not only were they involved in trade, बट ये प्रोडक्शन में भी डायरेक्टली या इनडायरेक्टली इन्वॉल्व थे. कैसे इन्वॉल्व थे वो क्लियर होगा. देयर वाज अ सिस्टम नोन एज द दादानी सिस्टम, उसके थ्रू इन्वॉल्व थे. अभी आगे जाओगे तो क्लियर हो जाएगा. फर्दर देयर वाज आल्सो अ वेल्दी नॉन मर्चेंट क्लास. तो इसमें कौन हो जाएगा? द एम्परर हिमसेल्फ, द लेडीज ऑफ द रॉयल कोर्ट, प्रिंसेस एज वेल एज nobles. They also had access to large amounts of wealth, and they were not simply accumulating this wealth, they were actively investing in trade as well. तो जो risk taking है ना, entrepreneur class, that was definitely present in India at that point of time. They also had availability of capital. So this wealth was not locked, it was mobile. That is the idea. Thus, a large money market definitely existed in India. तो पहला condition fulfilled, ठीक है? So there was definite potentiality of industrialization taking place in Mughal India. Second condition क्या होता है? The availability of commercial financing. अब देखो, industrialization, setting up an industry, purchasing raw material, transporting finished goods from one place to the other. This not only requires a large amount of capital, which may not be available with the capitalist personally, and therefore he requires credit. Credit कौन देगा? बैंकिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस देंगे. तो ये देखना है कि इंडिया में क्या उस तरह के बैंकिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस, फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशंस एग्जिस्ट करते थे या नहीं करते थे. फर्दर, टू फैसिलिटेट लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस ट्रेड, सर्टेन अदर थिंग्स आर रिक्वायर्ड. फॉर एग्जांपल, एक एक्सचेंज मैकेनिज्म होना चाहिए. तो मनी चेंजर्स प्रेजेंट होने चाहिए हर जगह पर, एक रीजन और दूसरे रीजन में, हु कैन फैसिलिटेट दिस ट्रेड. फर्दर, transporting actual physical money over extremely long distances, that is going to be extremely risky. तो क्या बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज टाइप के कोई इंस्ट्रूमेंट, फाइनेंशियल इंस्ट्रूमेंट्स एग्जिस्ट करते थे या नहीं करते थे? दैट वी नीड टू सी. फर्दर, लॉन्ग डिस्टेंस सी वॉयजेस, उनको इंश्योरेंस की जरूरत होती है, क्योंकि अगर शिप डूब गया तो इट इज गोइंग टू रिजल्ट इन अ मैसिव लॉस which is going to radiate throughout the market. तो कोई अंडरराइटर है या नहीं है उसके लिए. तो इस तरह के commercial financing instruments and practices, did they exist in Mughal India or not? Now we know from contemporary accounts that there was a well-developed system of banking as well as credit. Individuals, a group of individuals known as sarrafs, they acted not only as bankers but also as money changers. Financial instruments such as hundis were used as bills of exchange. Bills of exchange मतलब समझ में आता ना? क्या होता है? That it is a piece of paper issued by a merchant, let us say sitting in Gujarat, who transfers this to some other merchant who is interested in purchasing certain items in Arabia and bringing it to Gujarat. तो ये अपना पैसा लेकर के अरेबिया नहीं जाना चाहता है. He simply wants to take this bill of exchange. तो यहाँ पे ये जो मर्चेंट है, इस गुजराती मर्चेंट को अपना पैसा देगा, in return for which he is going to get a bill of exchange. This bill of exchange is going to be taken to Arabia and presented to the Arabic merchant by this trader. The Arabic merchant and Gujarati merchant are known to each other. Maybe they are members of the same family also, या फिर same company के हों, या फिर business associates होंगे. He is going to recognize this bill of exchange, उसको validate करेगा, and in return for this bill of exchange, he is going to hand over the goods demanded by this trader, who can now bring those goods back to India in order to sell them. इसको बोलते हैं हुंडी सिस्टम. प्रेजेंटली इट इज नोन एज बिल्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज. क्लियर? तो ये एग्जिस्ट करते थे. बैंकर्स वर आल्सो इन्वॉल्वड इन अंडरराइटिंग कॉमर्शियल वेंचर्स सच एज ओवरसीज वॉयजेस. तो इंश्योरेंस भी एग्जिस्ट करता था. ठीक है? एंड फर्दर द स्टेट थ्रू द कारखाना सिस्टम also finance production, not only for its own consumption but also for commercial use. तो मुगल एम्परर्स अपने कारखाने मेंटेन किया करते थे जहां पे कई सारे आइटम्स प्रोड्यूस होते थे, रेंजिंग फ्रॉम एम्ब्रॉयडर्ड सिल्क रोब्स टू कॉटन क्लॉथ टू यूटेंसिल्स टू आर्म्स एंड आर्मामेंट्स. अब मच ऑफ दिस डिमांड, मच ऑफ दिस प्रोडक्शन वाज यूज्ड फॉर द स्टेट्स ओन कंजम्पशन, लेकिन जो भी सरप्लस बचता था that was traded out into the open market. So the state was itself investing its revenues in the process of production and trade. तो state का भी यहाँ पे support मिल रहा था. Commercial financing का जो criteria है, that was also fulfilled. So two criteria have been fulfilled. Capital was available, commercial financing was well established. The third criteria of mercantilism is the existence of the putting out system. अब putting out system क्या होता है? देखो, it refers to the commercial mode of production. Suppose there is an Indian merchant who is interested in selling Indian silk cloth or cotton cloth in China. ठीक है? अब वो कैसे कर सकता है इसको? He is going to start giving out contracts to a large number of brokers. By the end of this period, let us say 6 months, I require this amount of this grade of cotton cloth from you. Now, these brokers are going to mobilize their network of artisans. तो हर broker a certain number of artisan clusters के साथ टच में रहता है, and he is going to give individual orders to each of these artisans or their families. And ये जो main trader है यहाँ पर, he is going to issue certain advances, loan देगा broker को, which is going to be further forwarded to the artisan so that he could purchase the tools that are needed to make these articles or raw material, etc., as wages, etc. And at the time of collection, they are going to pay the broker back in the quantity that has been, वो order अपना fulfill कर देंगे. ठीक है? This is known as the putting out system. Finally, this merchant can now transport his goods to China, where he can make a profit, and then next year the cycle repeats once again. ठीक है? इसको बोलते हैं putting out system. This is generally the first stage towards the commercialization of production. ठीक है? अब ये इंडिया में well established practice था in the 17th century. Indian merchants had been involved in putting out for more than 300 years before this. इंडिया में इस सिस्टम को बोलते थे दी दादानी सिस्टम. ठीक है? दादान कौन होता था? द मेन मर्चेंट हु यूज्ड टू गिव आउट ऑर्डर्स for certain quantity of finished products to individual artisans and their families through a series of brokers and sub brokers. ठीक है? It is generally the first steps towards the commercialization of not agriculture but production. Which is the transitory stage towards the evolution of industrial capitalism. तो दादानी सिस्टम से कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ प्रोडक्शन होता है. कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ प्रोडक्शन इज द नेक्स्ट स्टेप और उसका नेक्स्ट स्टेप होता है इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन ऑफ प्रोडक्शन. ठीक है. It involved the advancing of funds to primary producers by the merchant class or dadans through the use of brokers for specific orders. It was a well-established practice in India well before the 17th century. तो ये वाला कंडीशन भी fulfilled. तीन मेन कंडीशंस क्या क्या? Availability of capital fulfilled, availability of credit financing fulfilled, and finally dadani system fulfilled. So did potentiality exist? Definitely existed, but certain limitations or hurdles were also present. क्या लिमिटेशन था? सबसे पहला, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, लैक ऑफ टेक्निकल ब्रेक थ्रूज. देखो, इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन में the basis for the profitability of any venture is the creation of surplus value. ठीक है. Now production involves the transformation of raw material into a finished product. Now इस finished product में भी उसी raw material का यूज किया गया है जो कि इस स्टेज पे प्रेजेंट है, लेकिन कीमत किसकी ज्यादा होगी? इसकी ज्यादा होगी. अब जो सरप्लस वैल्यू है वो कहां से आया है? कीमत कैसे बढ़ी है? बिकॉज वैल्यू एडिशन हुआ है. इट हैज अंडरगॉन द प्रोसेस ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग. अब उस प्रोसेस ऑफ मैन्युफैक्चरिंग में कौन कौन से कॉस्ट हिडन है? फर्स्ट इज लेबर. ठीक है. सेकंड इज स्किल एंड थर्ड इज द प्रोसेस इटसेल्फ. ठीक है. तो कितना टेक्नोलॉजिकली एडवांस्ड है वो प्रोसेस, कितना एफिशिएंट है, कितना वेस्ट को रिड्यूस कर सकता है, दैट इज गोइंग टू बी द मेन डिटर्मिनेंट ऑफ वेदर इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन कैन टेक प्लेस और नॉट. देखो, अभी यहां पर अभी तक व्हेन प्री इंडस्ट्रियल स्टेज में है तो प्रोसेस तो जनरली सेम है, राइट? हर मैन्युफैक्चरर, हर आर्टिजन सेम प्रोसेस को यूज करके लेट अस सपोज कॉटन क्लॉथ बना रहा है. मेन डिफरेंशिएटर क्या हो रहा है? लेबर और स्किल. ठीक है. दैट इज गोइंग टू बी द मेन डिटर्मिनेंट ऑफ वैल्यू. अब इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन होने के लिए क्या करने की जरूरत है? प्रोसेस नीड्स टू बिकम द मेन यू कैन से contributor to surplus value production, value generation. And labor और skill का जो cost है या फिर जो influence है वो reduce हो जाए. And this allows the capitalist to monopolize the entire this thing, process of production. अभी power pre-industrial stage में किसके हाथ में है? जो इंडिविजुअल वर्कर है, आर्टिजन है, उसके हाथ में है. बिकॉज ही इज contributing to the value production, to the value creation through his own labor and skill. Now this has to be taken out of the equation. And when the process itself becomes the main contributor to surplus value generation, only then can industrialization take place. Because industrialization is always going to involve the manufacture of goods at a mass scale in a factory setting through a mechanized production. ठीक है, वहां पे लेबर के पास ये अपॉर्चुनिटी नहीं होना चाहिए कि वो इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट से या फिर कैपिटलिस्ट से compete कर सके। ठीक है, सो इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन का जो प्रोसेस है, इट इन्वॉल्व्स द क्रिएशन ऑफ कोअर्सिव कंट्रोल बाय द कैपिटलिस्ट ओवर द लेबर क्लास। राइट, अब देखते हैं कि बिकॉज ऑफ लैक ऑफ सफिशिएंट टेक्नोलॉजिकल ब्रेक थ्रूज, जो प्रोडक्शन का प्रोसेस है दैट रिमेन्ड द सेम एज द प्री इंडस्ट्रियल एज, and because of that surplus value creation associated with the process of production that was not possible। तो पावर किसके हैंड में रही, जो दादानी मर्चेंट्स हैं उनके हाथ में या फिर जो आर्टिजन्स हैं उनके हाथ में? जो आर्टिजन्स हैं उनके हाथ में। Thus primary producers remained in charge of the production process। This was one major limitation। What was it the result of? The lack of sufficient technical breakthroughs। Secondly, while the putting out system was well established in India, it was not able to penetrate deeply enough into the production process and monopolize it। As a result, हुआ क्या? Several groups of independent artisans were able to sustain a large market share। तो जो मर्चेंट क्लास है, इट वॉज नॉट एबल टू क्रिएट अ मोनोपोली ओवर द प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस, एंड इनके इंडिया में ही कई सारे इंटरनल कॉम्पिटिटर्स सस्टेन करते रहे। दिस प्रिवेंटेड कैपिटल एक्यूमुलेशन अप टू द क्रिटिकल थ्रेशहोल्ड। अब मोनोपोली के बिना वो जो क्रिटिकल लिमिट होता है दैट इज नीडेड फॉर इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन एंड टेक्नोलॉजिकल ब्रेक थ्रू, दैट वॉज नेवर अचीव्ड, राइट, एंड विच वॉज नेसेसरी फॉर द इमर्जेंस ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियल कैपिटलिज्म। तो वो स्टेज पहुंच ही नहीं पाया, उतना ज्यादा कैपिटल एक्यूमुलेशन हो ही नहीं पाया। थिर्डली, द आर्टिजन क्लास रिमेन्ड परपेचुअली मोबाइल। तो हमने क्या देखा है, दैट वन ऑफ द मेन फैक्टर्स ऑफ प्रोडक्शन इज लेबर, एंड द इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट नीड्स टू क्रिएट मोनोपोली ओवर द अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ लेबर। लेकिन अगर लेबर क्लास के पास बहुत सारे ऑप्शंस हैं कि अच्छा चलो ये काम नहीं करना है तो हम कुछ और काम कर लेते हैं, इस जगह पे नहीं काम करना है दूसरी जगह पे काम कर लेते हैं, इज दिस काइंड ऑफ मोनोपोलिस्टिक कंट्रोल गोइंग टू बी पॉसिबल? नहीं, इंडिया में यही हुआ। द आर्टिजन क्लास रिमेन्ड परपेचुअली मोबाइल बोथ फिजिकली एंड इकोनॉमिकली। Thus the commercial class was not in a position to mobilize it towards industrial scale production। ठीक है, and finally there was a natural conflict of interest between the dadan and the broker। अब दादान याद है ना, दिस इज द दादानी मर्चेंट, ये बंदा हो गया ब्रोकर, राइट। ही इज द कॉमन लिंक बिटवीन द दादानी मर्चेंट एंड द प्राइमरी प्रोड्यूसर। अब ये क्या कोशिश करेगा कि जो प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस में वैल्यू से जनरेशन हो रहा है इसका शेयर ऑफ प्रॉफिट सबसे ज्यादा हो। दिस इज गोइंग टू ईट इनटू द प्रॉफिट्स ऑफ द दादानी मर्चेंट। देयर इज गोइंग टू बी अ natural conflict of interest between the Dadani merchant and the broker, and it also affected efficiency। ठीक है, so the process of putting out in India was not as profitable as it had been in Europe। These were the limitations। तो क्या क्या limitations देखे हमने? lack of technological breakthroughs, secondly the presence of an independent artisan class which was also perpetually mobile, and finally the existence of a conflict of interest between the Dadani merchants and the brokers which harmed efficiency। ठीक है, तो because of this industrialization was not able to take place। और कंक्लूजन में हम क्या लिख सकते हैं? The potentiality existed but remained dormant due to some critical limitations। ठीक है, जो पोटेंशियल था वो एक्टिवेट नहीं हो पाया, वो सोता रह गया, इट कंटिन्यू टू रिमेन डॉर्मेंट। क्लियर? तो ये क्वेश्चन आता है अगर कि डिस्कस द पोटेंशियलिटी ऑफ यूरोपियन स्टाइल कैपिटलिज्म इमर्जिंग इन मुगल इंडिया, अब ये हो जाएगा एड्रेस, राइट। नेक्स्ट, write a short note on women in agrarian society in Mughal India। तो रूरल सेटिंग में विमेन के स्टेटस के बारे में बात करनी है। अब बताओ जनरल टेंडेंसी क्या होता है? मिडीवल इंडिया का टाइम है, विमेन का पोजीशन कैसा था? बहुत पुअर था, एक्सट्रीमली पुअर। विमेन वर नॉट अलाउड टू पार्टिसिपेट इन पब्लिक लाइफ एट ऑल, इकोनॉमिक पार्टिसिपेशन निल, एक्सेस टू एजुकेशन निल, कमर्शियल एंटरप्राइज निल, पॉलिटिकल पार्टिसिपेशन निल, women were kept behind the parda, closely sequestered in the four walls of the household. ये जनरल परसेप्शन है, राइट? However, upon deeper analysis, एक different reality emerge होता है, and simply that is going to be our introduction. The general tendency is to paint medieval India period, including the Mughal age, as a period when women were sequestered under the parda system. But upon a closer observation, a new and surprisingly nuanced reality emerges. तो एक नया पर्सपेक्टिव मिलता है आपको, and that is what we are going to expand upon next. क्या है इस बेसिस, इस पर्सपेक्टिव का बेसिस? The realization that the relationship between men and women, gender relations, are always going to be determined by what? By the economy, the nature of the economy. और जैसे जैसे इकोनॉमी ट्रांसफॉर्म होता जाएगा वैसे ही जेंडर रिलेशंस भी इवॉल्व होते जाएंगे, चेंज होते जाएंगे. The production process dictated the roles of women and men in Mughal agrarian society. Biases exist करते थे, but a synergy emerged between the two genders due to their shared economic responsibilities. अब रूरल सेटिंग में सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट प्रोडक्टिव एक्टिविटी क्या होता था? Cultivation, agriculture. Both men and women were required in the rural setting because of their agricultural labor. ठीक है? अब शुरू में there used to be a clear distinction between men and women. So gender roles were clearly defined in the agricultural process. Men were generally involved in the process of tilling or plowing the land, that is preparing the land for cultivation. Women were actually involved in the actual process of cultivation. So they were involved in tasks such as sowing of the seeds, threshing the seeds, and winnowing the seeds. So sowing or harvesting के process में women involved होती थी, right? However, a major transformation took place towards the later half of the Mughal Empire. क्या? कि कलेक्टिव विलेज फार्म्स अब कम होने लग गए एंड इंडिविजुएटेड फार्म लैंड्स, फार्म होल्डिंग फार्मस्टेड्स अब इमर्ज होने लग गए, राइट? एज अ रिजल्ट जो फैमिली लेबर है दैट बिकेम more and more important. It was not possible for the village community to any longer pool the entire labor of the village. अब हर फैमिली अपने इंडिविजुअल फार्म्स के ऊपर कल्टीवेट करेगी. तो अब ये बताओ कि जो जेंडर रोल्स का डिवीजन चल रहा है, इज इट गोइंग टू रिमेन इंटैक्ट या फिर इसको भी अब खत्म करना पड़ेगा और दीज रोल्स आर गोइंग टू बी डाइल्यूटेड आल्सो? ये भी अब डाइल्यूट हो जाएंगे बिकॉज both men as well as women are going to be required to do all the tasks that were generally traditionally reserved either only for men or only for women. With the emergence of individual family farmsteads, roles became blurred, resulting in greater synergy. ठीक है? तो जनरल टेंडेंसी शुरू में हमने क्या देखा था कि women तो पर्दे के पीछे रहती थी, कोई इकोनॉमिक रोल होता नहीं था उनका. लेकिन रियलिटी क्या है? That production process was dictating the relationship between men and women. And medieval period में क्या हो रहा था? Growth of agriculture, expansion of agriculture. Therefore, women became very valuable as a source of labor. Initially, community farming, village level पे farming होती थी community scale पर, right? Where gender roles were clearly defined. But gradually, individuated farmsteads began emerging and gender roles became diluted, leading to greater synergy. Now, because of the importance of women as not only labor but the creators of the future generation of farm labor, यहाँ पे कुछ यूनिक प्रैक्टिसेस देखने के लिए मिली हमें. जैसे क्या? इंस्टेड ऑफ डाउरी, ब्राइड प्राइस. ठीक है? ब्राइड प्राइस क्या होता है? that the man's family is going to pay a certain amount to purchase the bride to the bride's family. दहेज का एकदम उल्टा. जनरली क्या होता था, विडो रीमैरिज वाज बैंड, बट यहां पर अलाउड होगा, राइट? आप लोगों ने एक कस्टम के बारे में सुना होगा इन पंजाब, उसको बोलते हैं चादर. सुना है कभी? इसमें होता क्या है दैट आफ्टर द डेथ ऑफ अ मैन, हिज वाइफ इज जनरली मैरिड टू हिज यंगर ब्रदर. ठीक है, तो भाभी और देवर के बीच में शादी करवा देते हैं. व्हाई नॉट मैरी समबडी आउटसाइड द मैन्स हाउसहोल्ड? Because it would represent a loss of labor, not only the labor that the woman could potentially provide, but the future generations of labor that she could create. So the idea is ये घर का माल घर में ही रहना चाहिए, and it should not result in the export or in the you can say loss of this surplus value, this labor potential. ठीक है, तो widow remarriage and that too with the institution of चादर. तो ये हमको कुछ यूनिक चीजें देखने के लिए मिलती हैं रूरल सेटिंग में मिडिवल इंडिया में. एट द सेम टाइम स्ट्रिक्ट रिप्रोडक्टिव कंट्रोल वाज मेंटेन्ड ओवर वुमेन with extremely draconian punishments for infidelity. That if a woman cheats on her husband, उसका क्या रिजल्ट होगा? That she is creating children for somebody else. So my family is sustaining the woman, it is feeding her, it is looking after her, providing her security, and she is betraying not only me but my entire family. तो किस तरह के पनिशमेंट्स मिलते रहे होंगे? पब्लिकली स्टोन टू डेथ, जला देना, इस तरह के पनिशमेंट्स मिलते थे if somebody was unfaithful. What about the infidelity of men? What if a man was unfaithful? Was that accepted within the society? No, that was also not accepted within the society. It was frowned upon within the society. क्यों? Because the family unit was the basis of the entire society. ठीक है? It was the basis for agricultural production, and the infidelity either by men or women had the potential to destroy the family unit and thus permanently destroy the labor potential of that unit. However, bias exists करता था because men did not have the responsibility of bearing the next generation of laborers. Therefore, their infidelity was somewhat tolerated also. क्या चीज नहीं टॉलरेट होती थी? कि आदमी अपनी एक फैमिली को छोड़ दे, पूरा का पूरा अबैंडन कर दे और कोई दूसरी फैमिली एस्टैब्लिश कर ले. अगर ऐसा होता था, देन दी लोकल एलिट्स, जो सरपंच हो गया या फिर पंचायत हो गया, दे यूज्ड टू स्टेप इन and provide for the well-being of the abandoned woman and her children. They did not want कि एक पूरा घर खत्म हो जाए. They wanted to preserve their productive resource as well as tax-paying base. ठीक है? Male infidelity was treated mildly in contrast. However, the society tried to prevent male family abandonment as that may have resulted in the destruction of valuable human resources. Clear? Now, women were not only involved in the process of agricultural production, they were also playing an important role in the process of artisanal production, especially with the rising commercialization of production. Now, this was a time when European trade with India was rising. Dadani system was also becoming more and more entrenched. India's rural economy was getting linked to the global economy through the Dadani system. And यहाँ पर not only men but women का भी role काफी important हो गया. However, over here also certain biases existed. There were restrictions on menstruating women which prevented them from certain artisanal tasks. That at the time of menstruation, they were prohibited from working on the loom or let us say working with several tools since they were considered to be impure. Now, this was a means used by men to maintain their superiority within the artisanal process. So while women were playing an important role, their role was still subordinate to that of men in the production process. Now coming to the rural elites, तो जो जमींदार क्लास हो गया, वहां पे हमें क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? आर वी गोइंग टू फाइंड द इंस्टेंस ऑफ सती एटसेट्रा? नहीं देखने के लिए मिलता था. इनफैक्ट इन प्लेसेस सच एज पंजाब एंड बंगाल, among the rural elites, women, including widows, owned and inherited large estates of land. ठीक है, तो राजशाही in Bengal etc. For example, had a very important woman zamindar. She was the widow of a large zamindar. Right? So instead of performing sati, she inherited her husband's property. मुगल पेंटिंग्स में भी हमको ये नुआंस रियलिटी देखने के लिए मिलती है. They capture the roles played by women in the production process. तो women को किस तरह का लेबर प्रोवाइड करते हुए दिखाया गया है इन पेंटिंग्स में? For example, paintings found at Fatehpur Sikri shows scenes where both men and women are involved in the process of construction, constructing buildings, various monuments. तो men को किस तरह के टास्क में इन्वॉल्व दिखाया गया होगा? एजुकेटेड मेन को प्लानिंग में, एंड जो अनएजुकेटेड मेन है, जो लेबर क्लास है, उसको एक्चुअल प्रोसेस ऑफ कंस्ट्रक्शन में. तो यहाँ पे इनको स्किल्ड रोल्स परफॉर्म करते हुए दिखाया जा रहा है, अनस्किल्ड रोल्स. स्किल्ड रोल्स, रिलेटिवली मोर स्किल्ड रोल्स. विमेन ऑन द अदर हैंड, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ टास्क्स आर दे डूइंग? दे आर कैरिंग लोड्स. तो सर पे लोड उठा करके एक से दूसरी जगह पे जा रहे हैं, और फेचिंग वाटर एटसेट्रा. तो स्किल्ड रोल्स और अनस्किल्ड रोल्स, unskilled roles. ठीक है, so even in these paintings this nuance has been captured. Different skill levels were at display in these paintings. और conclusion में हम क्या बोल सकते हैं? Thus in Mughal India, women transcended their stereotypical roles. Stereotypically, women were expected to remain behind the parda, but this was not the case in Mughal rural India. At the same time, women were not equal to men and continued to face several biases also. Thus, the position of women in Mughal agrarian society was a complicated one. Perhaps it was undergoing a transition. ठीक है, तो हमको वो ट्रांजिशन का स्नैपशॉट मिलता है when we look at the position of women in rural society of Mughal India. Clear है? तो general tendency to portray women as silent spectators, as secondary adjuncts, as impersonal beings living under the shadow of men. बट क्लोजर ऑब्जर्वेशन के बाद एक नया पर्सपेक्टिव इमर्ज होता है. रोल ऑफ विमेन डिफाइंड बाय देयर इन्वॉल्वमेंट इन द प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस, नॉट ओनली अग्रेरियन प्रोडक्शन बट आल्सो आर्टिजनल प्रोडक्शन. एलिट्स में भी हमको ये देखने के लिए मिलता है. इवन कंटेम्प्रेरी कल्चर में भी इन्वॉल्वमेंट ऑफ विमेन इन प्रोडक्टिव रोल्स, फॉर एग्जाम्पल मुगल पेंटिंग्स में देखने के लिए मिल रहा है. कंक्लूजन: women seem to have transcended their traditional roles. Does this mean that men and women were equal? No, they were definitely not equal, and women continued to face several biases. But the Mughal agrarian society was a complicated one, perhaps undergoing transformation. Okay? That is the note on which we'll conclude. Next question. Medieval Indian towns were merely extensions of villages. Now, this is an opinion expressed by Francisco Palesert in the 17th century, and it was based on socio-economic and physical observation of Mughal cities. This is an opinion that has often been parroted by colonial historians. Why? Because colonial historians desperately wanted to convince everyone that Mughal India was not the proverbial bird of gold. India में काफी ज़्यादा poverty थी during Mughal period, and as a symptom of this, they tried to argue that medieval towns were merely extensions of villages. तो जैसे यूरोपियन टाउन्स थे प्रॉपर सिटीज, वैसे उस तरह के medieval इंडियन टाउन्स नहीं हुआ करते थे. In fact, they were trying to argue that Indian towns or Indian cities were somehow less than or inferior to यूरोपियन टाउन्स और यूरोपियन सिटीज. ठीक है, तो ये आर्ग्यू करना चाह रहे थे कॉलोनियल हिस्टोरियंस, एंड दे हैव टेकन द ओपिनियन एक्सप्रेस्ड बाय फ्रांसिस्को पेलसर्ट टू हार्ट. Pailsert was a Dutch traveler who visited India in the 17th century and made several observations of the society, economy, and physical characteristics of Indian cities to come to the conclusion that medieval Indian towns were merely extensions of villages. Clear है? और डिपेंडिंग ऑन द लेंथ ऑफ योर आंसर यू कैन चूज कि इसमें से कौन कौन सी इंफॉर्मेशन आपको देनी है, कौन सी विदहोल्ड करनी है. क्लियर? अच्छा, नाउ ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ दीज ऑब्जर्वेशंस colonial historians have come to certain conclusions about medieval Indian cities, especially Mughal India में. They are of the opinion that a rural urban continuum existed, that is an unbroken link between village life and city life existed. In order to argue that देखो cities in India are not distinct geographical and socio-economic wholes, rather they are simply extensions of villages. तो क्या आर्ग्यू करते हैं ये on the basis of Pailsert's observations? That social structures, attitudes, and values in both the cities as well as villages were the same. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल हम किसकी बात कर सकते हैं? कास्ट बेस्ड डिस्टिंक्शंस, untouchability, the practice of sati, child marriage, etc. Now, where do you expect certain such things to be more dominant? Village setting में या city की setting में? Village की setting में. लेकिन according to the European historians, they were equally dominant in both villages as well as cities. ठीक है? Further, it has been observed कि जो अर्बन एलिट्स थे, चाहे वो दादानी मर्चेंट्स हो जाए, चाहे बैंकर्स हो जाए, एटसेट्रा, कोई भी हो जाए, all of them maintained a revenue base tied to land in rural areas, whether it is administrators or merchant class या फिर soldiers हो गए, commanders हो गए, या even nobles and royals who were all living in the cities. main source of income इनका क्या था? revenue income from the villages. ठीक है? So they were also involved in distinctly rural activities rather than urban pursuits. Further, putting out system or the Dadani system had penetrated rural areas also. This means that greater economic integration was happening between cities and villages. Further, there was cultural linkage of towns and villages through movements such as the Bhakti and Sufi movements. Bhakti and Sufi saints and their followers moved continuously between the cities and villages, and thus a great degree of cultural exchange was taking place between these settings. तो उसकी वजह से हुआ क्या? जो कल्चरेशन था दोनों का वो अब डाइल्यूट होने लग गया, एंड कल्चरल असिमिलेशन स्टार्टेड टू टेक प्लेस. तो सिटी का कल्चर, विलेज का कल्चर ऑलमोस्ट इनडिस्टिंग्विशेबल होने लग गया. दिस इज देयर आर्ग्यूमेंट. ठीक है? Then next, they have also highlighted the characteristics of urban architecture in Mughal India. क्या बोलते हैं? That it had distinct rural characteristics. There is going to be direct comparison between Indian cities and European cities. यूरोपियन सिटीज में क्या बोलेंगे? वी ऑब्जर्व आर्किटेक्चरल यूनिफॉर्मिटी इन सिटीज सच एज पेरिस और रोम और लंदन। इंडियन केस में क्या होगा? कोई आर्किटेक्चरल यूनिफॉर्मिटी नहीं होगा। मुगल टाउन्स डिस्प्लेड लैक ऑफ आर्किटेक्चरल यूनिफॉर्मिटी। Structures differed in stylistic components, construction technique and materials. तो unlike the European cities, इंडिया में स्टाइल ऑफ बिल्डिंग्स अलग अलग थे, कंस्ट्रक्शन टेक्निक्स अलग थे, कॉन्सेप्ट्स हर बिल्डिंग्स के अलग थे और मटेरियल्स भी अलग अलग यूज होते थे इन दी सेम सिटीज फॉर कंस्ट्रक्टिंग डिफरेंट टाइप्स ऑफ बिल्डिंग्स. While some houses were made of brick and stone, others were made of clay and straw. तो क्ले एंड स्ट्रॉ स्ट्रक्चर्स आपको कहाँ देखने के लिए यूजुअली मिलते हैं? सिटीज में या विलेजेस में? विलेजेस में. बट इंडिया के केस में सिटीज में भी देखने के लिए मिल रहे थे. देयरफॉर अर्बन आर्किटेक्चर हैड डिस्टिंक्टली रूरल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स. फर्दर, historian S.C. Mishra notes the presence of peasant urbanites. Peasant urbanites कौन थे? He uses this term to describe urban inhabitants engaged in agrarian activities. तो ये आर्ग्यू कर रहे हैं that city का जो population था that was not constant, that was subject to seasonal migration between the villages and the cities. जब एग्रीकल्चर क्रॉपिंग सीजन होता था तो ये लोग कहाँ पे रहेंगे? विलेजेस में. जब ऑफ सीजन होगा तो कहाँ पे काम करेंगे? सिटीज में माइग्रेट कर जाएंगे. एंड दे वर द वंस हु वर इनहैबिटिंग दी रूरल टाइप स्ट्रक्चर. जो स्ट्रॉ क्ले और स्ट्रॉ के हट्स हो गए एटसेट्रा, ये लोग यहाँ पे रह रहे थे. फर्दर ही ऑल्सो आर्ग्यूज दैट while some of the artisans were permanently based in the cities, but all of them definitely had land as well as relatives living in nearby villages. ठीक है. So इनको किस तरह से डिफाइन किया गया है? As peasant urbanites. Further, the colonial historians have talked about the process of transformation of villages into towns. क्या बोलते हैं कि unlike Europe where villages transformed into towns due to economic processes as they emerged as industrial and trade centers, India में the bulk of cities were the products of political action. Example लिया है इन्होंने आगरा का, a village that suddenly evolved into a city when Sikandar Lodi decided that this was going to be his new capital. Villages, that is larger ones, had exchange culture that allowed them to transform. अब कुछ villages जो थे वो बड़े होते गए and they started to assume the shape of market towns and ultimately cities. But क्योंकि ये village से इमर्ज होकर के आए थे तो इसमें कई सारे रूरल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स देखने के लिए मिलते थे. राइट. दैट इज व्हाट दे हैव आर्ग्यूड. क्लियर है इतना? ना अब क्या आएगा? काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स आएंगे. हाउएवर, नॉट ऑल टाउन्स फुलफिल्ड दीज क्राइटेरियाज एंड वर नॉट सिंपली रूरल एक्सटेंशंस. तो कई सारे ऐसे टाउन्स थे which were distinctly urban in character. For example, दिल्ली हो गया, आगरा हो गया, अहमदाबाद हो गया, बदायूं हो गया, बरेली हो गया, लखनऊ हो गया, etc. There were four distinct types of cities in India: administrative centers, religious centers, military or strategic centers, and market centers. Contemporary accounts also defy the description of towns as mere extensions of villages. For example, the Ain-e-Akbari, the Storia do Mogor, the writings of Ralph Fitch, etc. All of them describe the bustle of major cities such as Delhi, Agra और Ahmedabad. और जो फॉरेन ट्रैवलर्स के अकाउंट्स हैं such as Nicola Manucci etc. और Ralph Fitch, They are in awe of the size of Indian cities, the population of Indian cities, the wealth at display in the Indian cities, the number of foreign travelers who are present in the streets of Indian cities, the types of goods, their value being traded in the Indian markets, etc. Right? So, to suggest that Indian towns were somehow less than medieval European towns, that is unfair and that is clear colonial propaganda. Right? और इंडिया में अलग अलग टाइप्स के सिटीज थे, कोई ऐसा एक टाइप का सिटी नहीं था जो कि अचानक से बन गया बिकॉज ऑफ पॉलिटिकल एक्शन और some larger villages which finally emerged into towns. In India, cities emerged as different, or there were different kinds of structural functions that cities performed. Administrative centers, religious centers, military centers और market centers की तरह act करते थे. Now, in conclusion, क्या बोल सकते हैं? Medieval age was a period of unprecedented urban growth for India. Unparalleled amount of urban growth was taking place. It was a transformative period for the Indian economy. Europe had also undergone a similar experience between the 14th and 17th century. तो इंडिया जो चीज 16-17 सेंचुरी में एक्सपीरियंस कर रहा था, यूरोप 14 to 17 सेंचुरी में एक्सपीरियंस कर चुका था. The presence of some rural features is going to be natural. This was also seen in European cities such as Rome or Paris or Vienna or London before the onset of industrialization. यहाँ पे भी कई सारे रूरल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स देखने के लिए मिलते थे, which Palesert has pointed out in the context of Indian cities and which European colonial historians like to do in the case of medieval Indian towns. लेकिन वो यूरोप में भी present थे during this period. So it is a natural feature of urbanization. Urbanization is not a sudden process, it is an organic process linked with economic changes. The economic changes are always going to take place over a lengthy period of time. तो gradual evolution होता है. जो अर्बन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स है उनके इमरजेंस में थोड़ा टाइम लगता है, तो देयरफॉर इट इज नेचुरल कि वो जो ट्रांसफॉर्मेटिव पीरियड है वहां पे आपको रूरल कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स भी दिखेंगे और अर्बन कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स भी दिखेंगे. एंड thus Indian cities were in no sense somehow less than European towns. Clear? So that is how we can conclude our answer. Is this clear? And finally, we come to the question, critically examine the Mughal Empire as a centralized state. तो बताओ सेंट्रलाइज स्टेट था या फिर नहीं था? इट इज अ मैटर ऑफ डिबेट. ठीक है. मार्क्सिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस such as Irfan Habib and Athar Ali, they argue that the Mughal Empire was a highly centralized one. ठीक है. क्या बेसिस था मुगल एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन का अकॉर्डिंग टू देम? So the basis of Mughal administrative centralization was twofold: administrative uniformity and the presence of checks and balances. ठीक है. How was Mughal administrative centralization visible during the Mughal Empire? Because of the presence of an efficient and centralized revenue system, the efficient working of the Mansabdari and Jagirdari system, the presence of uniform coinage, and the ideology of centralization, including concepts such as Parezidi, Sulaykul, Deen-e-Ilahi, etc. Right? Functionally, उसका basis क्या था? Administrative uniformity and checks and balances. These were the two hallmarks of Mughal administrative centralization. ठीक है. कैसे आर्ग्यू किया है इसके लिए? अथर अली और इरफान हबीब ने. They have said that the four most important departments of central administration in the Mughal Empire were Diwan-e-Ala, Diwan-e-Arz, Sadr-us-Sudur, and the Diwan-e-Saman. Right? Diwan-e-Wizarat or Diwan-e-Ala was the Department of Finances. Diwan-e-Arz was the Department of Military Administration. Sadr-us-Sudur was the Department of Ecclesiastical, you can say, donation. So स्टेट जो भी वक्फ या वजीफा देता था वो इसके थ्रू देता था. एंड दीवाने समान वाज द डिपार्टमेंट दैट वाज रिस्पांसिबल फॉर सीइंग द expenditure of the royal household, the provision of goods to the royal household, the maintenance of karkhanas, etc. Right? Now, it was important for the empress to delegate a great degree of authority to the individuals who were heading these departments, but at the same time prevent them from gaining too much power, accumulating excessive amounts of power, or interfering in the jurisdiction of other officials. तो इस सिस्टम की इंटीग्रिटी को मेंटेन करना बहुत जरूरी था. हाउ वाज दैट मेंटेन्ड? दीवाने वजारत में, instead of appointing a single Diwan-e-Ala, Akbar adopted the practice of appointing at the same time as many as 6 separate Diwans. तो यानी कि एक कोई भी सुप्रीम फाइनेंशियल ऑफिशियल मिनिस्टर नहीं होगा, कई सारे रहेंगे एक साथ. राइट? The accounts of the Diwan-e-Arz, Sadr-us-Sudur and Diwan-e-Saman were regularly scrutinized by the Diwan, by the Diwan-e-Wizarat, the revenue department. Right? Similarly, while the Mir Bakshi, that is the war minister, was head of the Diwan-e-Arz, but he was not the paymaster general. He was not involved in directly paying the soldiers. That was done by the emperor through the Diwan-e-Ala once again. Further, the Mir Bakshi was the nominal head of the entire Mansabdari system. So he was sitting at the top. But in matters of appointment, transfer, promotion, etc., final decision किसके हाथ में होता था? Emperor के हाथ में होता था. The Sadr-us-Sudur and Diwan-e-Saman were also controlled by maintaining financial control through the office of Diwan-e-Ala. Right? तो इस तरह से इंपीरियल अथॉरिटी को प्रिजर्व किया जाता था. सेकेंडली, checks and balances were visible throughout all levels of Mughal administration, from the center to the very bottom. एक तो हमने देख लिया checks and balances central administration में कैसे maintain किए जा रहे हैं. Secondly, checks and balances were applied uniformly throughout the empire. Akbar was the one who introduced standardized provincial administration. He introduced the सूबा system. और सूबा में 4 ऑफिशियल्स होते थे सूबा लेवल पर. कौन कौन? सूबेदार, दीवान, बख्शी एंड काजी. Subedar was in charge of overall administration. Diwan was the provincial revenue minister, finance minister. Bakshi was the provincial war minister, and Qazi was the chief justice at the provincial level, at the सूबा लेवल. ये एक दूसरे की अथॉरिटी के ऊपर चेक्स मेंटेन करते थे. नाउ Subedar was overall in charge of administration. He was nominally the senior most official in provincial administration. But to counterbalance his power, या तो दीवान या फिर बख्शी को एक ऐसा ऑफिसर बनाया जाता था, एक ऐसे ऑफिसर को बनाया जाता था जिसका मनसब रैंक सूबेदार से हाई हो. तो विद इन द मनसबदारी सुपीरियर कौन हुआ? these other officials, but within provincial administration, this official. The Bakshi was also in charge of intelligence gathering, and he was empowered to bypass the सूबेदार and send his reports directly to the emperor. तो इस तरह से at all levels uniform administration as well as checks and balances को enforce किया गया. Is this clear? Now ऐसा बोलते हैं कौन? The Marxist historians. However, some other historians disagree with the Marxist historians. For example, Stephen P. Blake and J.F. Richards have argued that Mughal administration was not characterized by imperial supremacy or royal supremacy. Rather, it was a form of patrimonial bureaucracy. That means administrative centralization was present, but the emperor was not at the center of the administrative machinery. Rather, the bureaucracy was controlled by different members of the imperial household, the imperial family. And इन्होंने केस लिया है नूरजहां का. Who was the emperor? जहांगीर. क्या करता था? अफीम पीता था, अफीम खाता था और सो जाता था. He would tour different regions of his empire. He was not involved in day-to-day administration. Day-to-day administration therefore fell upon Noor Jahan and the immediate members of her family, her brothers, her father, etc. They were the ones controlling the bureaucracy. जो जितने भी important imperial positions थे, ministerial positions थे, it was in their hands. They were the ones who were appointing subedars, etc. So central administration as well as provincial administration was being controlled by members of the imperial household rather than the emperor personally. It has been argued that this feature may have been clearly visible during the reign of Noor Jahan, but it was also part of the established practice at the Mughal court. So generally, members of the family of the royal wives of Mughal emperors, such as Man Singh, who was the who was the brother of one of the wives of Akbar, he was directly involved in administration on a day-to-day basis. तो administration centralized तो था, but not being directly controlled by the emperor, but by members of the imperial household. इस system को क्या बोलते हैं? Patrimonial bureaucracy. Right? Then finally, we have some revisionist historians such as Muzaffar Alam, Chetan Singh, Sanjay Subramanian, Streisand, etc. What have they done? They have questioned the level and uniformity of administrative centralization. तो इसके ऊपर इन्होंने question mark लगाया है. Streisand, for example, says that the level of centralization was considerably lesser at the periphery. तो यूनिफॉर्म नहीं था एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन. जो कोर रीजन्स ऑफ द एम्पायर है वहां पे तो सेंट्रलाइजेशन हाई रहा होगा, लेकिन जो फार फ्लंग पेरिफेरल रीजन्स है वहां पे सेंट्रलाइजेशन कम था. राइट? कैसे पता लगता है? That different systems of revenue administration prevailed in different regions. जहां पे कोर रीजन्स होंगे, जहां पे एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन हाई होगा, वहां पे कौन सा सिस्टम लगेगा? दी जब्ती सिस्टम और दी दहसाला सिस्टम. जो पेरिफेरल रीजन्स है वहां पर बटाई सिस्टम और दी नसक सिस्टम लगेगा, बिकॉज इंपीरियल मशीनरी इज नॉट स्ट्रॉन्ग इनफ टू पेनिट्रेट दोज रीजन्स डायरेक्टली. क्लियर? Muzaffar Alam has conducted a study of Punjab and Chetan Singh a study of Awadh, and both have observed in these regions that the transfer of Jagirs was not a regular affair. Right? The transfer of Jagirs was one of the main instruments of centralization. Okay? Because the emperor had the ability to transfer a Jagirdar from one place to the other. He was able to prevent the entrenchment of that Jagirdar in the local power structure. Okay? The Jagirdar also remained completely and entirely dependent upon the emperor for getting good Jagirs. Therefore, he would remain loyal to the emperor. लेकिन अगर ये ट्रांसफर ऑफ जागीर्स बहुत इनफ्रीक्वेंटली हो रहे हैं फॉर एग्जाम्पल एन अकबर में लिखा है हर 2-3 साल में होते थे। यहाँ पे क्या नोटिस किया गया है कि कई बार 30-35 साल निकल जाते थे, किसी जागीरदार का ट्रांसफर नहीं होता था। दैट मीन्स दैट एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव सेंट्रलाइजेशन हाई है या लो है? लो है, राइट? So they have observed that transfer of Jagirs was not a regular affair. Further, they have argued that Mughal control at the lower levels was tenuous. तो बहुत strong नहीं था lower levels पर control, especially in the periphery. Thus, they had to resort to tactics such as granting madad-e-maash grants to counterbalance the local elites. madad-e-maash grants पहले बताया था आपको? These were grants made by the Mughal emperors to religious scholars, theologians, artists, etc., given to them in far-flung areas, जहां पे इनको barren land assign किया जाता था, so that they could create their own estates over there, and with this they would have the ability to counterbalance the local elites. क्योंकि ये मदद-ए-माश grants इनको किसने दी हैं? Emperor ने. They are going to remain loyal to the emperor because the emperor has weak control at the peripheral levels. He needs this instrument. So this was not a result, this was not a manifestation of administrative centralization. Rather, this was the expression of a compulsion that the Mughal emperors felt to create a new power structure at the local level in the peripheries. Okay? So that is what is the argument. And finally, the region-centric approach to the Mughal decline is also predicated upon decentralized administrative structure. अभी ये region centric approach to decline है, that we are going to discuss in our next class जब decline of Mughal empire को देखेंगे, ठीक है? तो that is also based upon administrative decentralization rather than centralization. ठीक है? Conclusion में क्या बोल सकते हैं? That what is debatable? The actual level of centralization. लेकिन ideologically empire centralized था या decentralized था? Complete centralized, completely centralized था, ठीक है? Now, despite these arguments, the centralizing tendencies of the Mughal administration are undeniable. Thus, there is no straightforward way to analyze the level of centralization. What can be stated with certainty is that the level of centralization varied over the course of the Mughal history. ठीक है? From time to time, from place to place, from emperor to emperor, लेवल ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन चेंज होता जाएगा. कोई स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड वे नहीं है टू एनालाइज द एग्जैक्ट लेवल ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन, बट जो टेंडेंसी था, जो आइडियोलॉजिकल फैब्रिक था मुगल एम्पायर का, दैट वाज अ हाईली सेंट्रलाइज्ड वन. ठीक है? सो दैट इज हाउ वी कैन एड्रेस दिस. अब एक चीज बचती है हमारी, दैट इज मुगल डिक्लाइन, that we are going to do in our next lecture, और उसके बाद मराठास को कवर करेंगे. मुगल्स का आर्ट एंड कल्चर, कोई क्वेश्चन तो आता नहीं है. इफ यू वांट आई कैन गिव यू अ राइट अप ऑन दैट. तो क्योंकि क्लास में बैठ के बताने में उसको फीचर्स बहुत फैक्चुअल होता है, राइट? तो मैं आपको उसका राइट अप दे देता हूँ, उससे कर लीजिएगा आप लोग. चलिए देन.